Prime Minister Justin Trudeau flew to BC over the long weekend. He made a stop in Kamloops for a ceremony marking the one-year anniversary since the discovery of 215 unmarked graves near a former residential school. And our PM was greeted by a lot of heckling, loud drumming, and boos. To talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley joins us once again from Toronto. Now, Brian, why all of the boos and jeers? Does it have maybe something to do with not having clean drinking water at so many reservations across the country?
Well, I think there was just a general antipathy towards the government on a lot of different fronts. There were chants of, uh, you know, land in Canada is all Indian land, things like that. There were chants for him to go home. There were, screaming at him. At one point, he actually had to to say to people, "Look, you can hate me, but respect your elders." And the elders invited me here. Might be a fair point, but it sounds odd and strange for the prime minister to be having to say that. Of course, the last time that he was in the news when it came to Kamloops was on the National Day of Reconciliation, and he was flying west, and we thought he might be going there. Instead, he went to Fino, British Columbia, to go surfing for a weekend on a day that was supposed to be about reconciliation, a day of remembrance of a somber day. So look, Justin Trudeau has made the issue of relations with First Nations his top priority. He says that's what he says, but his actions and the deliverables, as his government bureaucrats might say in their bureaucratic language, it's not there. And so I think there's a lot of anger towards him. Lots of people pointing out that this evening he's in Surrey for $1,000 head fundraiser, and maybe that's the real reason for his trip. That's a little unfair, but if I were in the prime minister's office and somebody said, "Oh, great, while the PM's out there, we're going to have a fundraiser," I would have said, "No, not this trip." Just even giving the appearance of linking them puts him in a bad light. So it wasn't a good trip for him. And it wasn't a good look, and it shows that his most important relationship, as he has so often said, isn't working out that well.
Now, Brian, the Prime Minister's handling of the Emergencies Act continues to dog him as well. Last week, we learned that not only did the RCMP not ask for the act to be invoked, but neither did the Ottawa Police Service. Why not?
So, acting, police chief Steve Bell, the man who took over after Peter Slowly was forced out in the middle of the convoy, and for his lack of action, his inability to handle it, Steve Bell showed up and said, "No, we didn't ask for the act." Now, let me point out that both Bell and RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki talked about how they used the act and that it gave them powers, but they didn't ask for it. Is there a difference? Yeah, there is. The government has said time and again, we did this because law enforcement asked for it. Then, when law enforcement was asked at a parliamentary committee, they said, "No, wasn't us." So, the problem with the government's narrative around their entire reaction to the convoy has fallen apart. It wasn't majority foreign funded. GoFundMe showed up at parliamentary committee and said more than 88% of the dollars donated came from Canadians. It wasn't started by Russians. Do I think there could have been Russian bots at some troll farm in St. Petersburg exploiting these things? Sure, but there were CBC reports fed by the government talking about how this was a result of Russian interference. That's not true either. The apartment fire was not related to the convoy. Many of the reasons they cited, like guns being found in the vehicles, there were no guns found in the vehicles. So the government's narrative on this convoy has fallen apart. By the way, all of that backs up my statement from the beginning that this was a failure of local law enforcement and the city of Ottawa to deal with this properly. If they had dealt with it properly, people would have showed up, protested, gone home, or they would have showed up, protested, gone home, come back, gone home, come back the way they normally do. This was a failure of local administration, and we invoked the Emergencies Act to suspend charter rights, to target bank accounts. This was an overreach of an unbelievable degree. And every argument the government's put forward so far has fallen apart. You know, the inquiry into this will be very interesting to watch.
Now, Brian, we've chatted previously about the revelations that the military was flying a spy plane over the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa last February, and officials said, they didn't do anything wrong. What are the latest revelations on this story?
The latest revelation, and this is, the government line, and some people say it's complete spin. I'll take it for what it's worth. I'll take it at face value until I have information otherwise, is that they were told not to do this, but they did it anyway. So let's back up and tell the story a bit. There was a plane flying overhead during the convoy, and it started in late January. So the convoy showed up, I don't know, around the 26th, 27th. They started trickling over those days of January. A few days later, there's a spy plane going overhead. And then it went overhead a few days after that, a few days in February. All of it was done, all that we know, was done before the Emergencies Act was invoked. Now, this is a spy plane that can zero in and know what you're saying on your cell phone as you're walking down the street tile. It can pick up conversations. It is an incredibly sophisticated piece of equipment. Now, here is where it gets tricky. Military said it wasn't them, or the government initially denied it was them. Then it turns out the military said, well, it was, but it wasn't our plane. We were trying out, we were test driving essentially a plane that we're going to buy. Okay, so, well, who was who was in the cockpit? Oh, it was Special Forces members. So it was the military. Yes. They were told, though, to stay away, and they went anyway. And part of the rationale was, well, it's not our plane. We're just doing a test drive, so it's okay. We still don't know what they did with the information they collected. And there's no doubt that as they're trying out this piece of equipment, that they did collect information, that they did listen in on phone calls, that they did track individuals, because that's the whole point of testing it, is to see, will this work when we buy it? And they're buying this plane. So what did they do with that information? Did they turn it over to the government? Did they turn it over to the police? That's very serious implications if the military is now spying on Canadians in a protest. Again, you can say the protest was illegal. You can say you don't like it. This started before any of those declarations of the protest being illegal. They were spying on Canadians in the early days during a very peaceful part of the protest. So, there are a lot of implications here. The government's not giving straight answers.
Scary how much Big Brother's been watching here, Brian. Now, Prince Charles and Camilla were both in Canada last week. It was short and sweet ahead of the Victoria Day long weekend. Did their visit really do anything to shore up shrinking support for the monarchy here in Canada?
Maybe if you were in St. John's, Newfoundland, where there was a big splash. I'm not sure that it made a big splash in Ottawa. And if so, it's been forgotten because people are dealing with other things in the nation's capital right now. And then up to Iqaluit, where very few people saw them. There's not a big population there, not a large media presence. We've all seen the polls that show that a lot of Canadians say, look, after Queen Elizabeth dies, we're fine cutting ties with the monarchy. Are we going to head in that direction? Well, Australia just elected a government, Labor government. Part of their promise was to go to a republic system. We don't have any of the parties calling for that yet, but I don't think that this tour necessarily helped. It didn't hurt. And look, I'll say this as a reluctant monarchist. I'm not prone to love the monarchy, but I just say that it's better than the alternatives we have. I worry that we'll turn into the Soviet Socialist Republic of Kazakhstan if we allow academics to rewrite our constitution. I like our constitution as it is, and I worry of what will come next. But I'll say that Prince Charles, when I have covered him, is very attentive to people like veterans and those that he's engaged with. And unlike many politicians, he's not looking past you to see who's more important in the room behind you. He's actually focused in on you. Will that resonate with people? I don't think so. And I don't think the public is in a mood to really warm up to Charles at this point. If they skipped over to, William and Kate, maybe, because people love Kate, but I'm not sure that the love of the royal family extends much beyond Queen Elizabeth at this point.
Brian, the federal Tory leadership race made headlines recently. Frontrunner Pierre Poiliev was first accused of being a racist. Then he was criticized for his stance on the World Economic Forum taking place in Davos, Switzerland. Now let's start off with some who are calling Pierre Poiliev a racist. How did that come to be?
It came to be because he did a podcast interview with Jordan Peterson. And, if the chattering classes dislike someone more than they dislike Pierre Poiliev, it's Jordan Peterson. He's controversial. He's horrible. He's all kinds of things. And the two of them talking together, oh, this is going to give all kinds of great headlines. Well, the worst they found was Pierre Poiliev used the term Anglo-Saxon words. He was talking about his style in trying to communicate with people. And he said, I use short Anglo-Saxon words. Now, it's not a common way for people to speak, and it's not the way that someone who actually does just use short, simple words would describe themselves. But Pierre Poiliev and Jordan Peterson are two smart guys, two interesting guys, and two very weird guys. Like, let's face it, they're interesting, they're smart, and they're weird, and it's why they do what they do. And so they're having an interesting intellectual conversation. When Pierre gets up on stage, he does speak in very simple terms, and he uses simple communication tools. As you and I are taught in broadcasting, we're taught to speak in simple terms, not because the audience is dumb, not because the audience can't understand, but because it's the easiest way to make yourself understood to the majority of people. But the term Anglo-Saxon was deemed by some to be a dog whistle for white replacement theory, for white supremacy. He was channeling George Orwell. George Orwell wrote an entire essay called On Politics and the English Language back in the late 40s, early 50s. I forget the exact date, but he talked about how too many people use long, flowery words, Latinate words, words derived from Latin and French that when they're strung together don't mean anything, when these short, simple Anglo-Saxon words should be used in its place. And he gave advice to writers, including use short, simple words, cut words out if you don't need them. That's what he was channeling, but somehow they turned it into him being racist and a white supremacist. I'm sorry, he's a very bad white supremacist if he is one, because he's married to a woman who is a proud Latina from Venezuela who gets up and talks about her family's experience. Last time I checked, Hal, white supremacists don't like Latinas, they don't like immigrants, and they wouldn't have one introduce them on stage talking about how great they are. It was a very bizarre thing to show up in the media. And quite frankly, Pierre deserves better.
That is a kind of a weird spin, absolutely. Brian, the World Economic Forum has had its fair share of critics. Can you explain exactly what it is and why so many people, including Pierre Poiliev, are dead set against the World Economic Forum?
Not really. Look, this is the other thing that got Pierre in the news is he said he would not allow ministers in his government to be at the World Economic Forum. Well, Pierre Poiliev was part of a government that went many times. Stephen Harper spoke many times. John Baird, who's his campaign co-chair, spoke at the World Economic Forum. And they went there to advance Canada's interest, to promote Canada. The World Economic Forum started in 1971. It's held in Davos, Switzerland every year. It attracts top government and business leaders. And I think Boris Johnson called it a place filled with too much champagne and huge egos. That's all accurate. And there's some weird things done there, but they don't control elections. I've been told that they control elections in Canada, that they're the reason that Donald Trump wasn't elected in the States. I was told before Jason Kenney, he didn't lose, he got 51.4%, but I was hearing from people saying if Jason Kenney isn't removed, it's because the World Economic Forum has chosen him and they've decided he's going to be there. People are taking this weird talk shop that puts out strange ideas. This week, they're talking about regulating cryptocurrency. We need to change how we view freedom of speech. But for every one of those weird ideas, there are people arguing against them. Okay, like as much as I don't like them, and they have weird things, it's not as if every utterance is turned into a policy that we in Canada have to adopt. But that is what some people are now believing about the World Economic Forum. And it's why I was critical of Poiliev this week for his statement that we shouldn't have people who go to these things as part of the Canadian government. Well, Stephen Harper went to address and advance Canada's interests and talk about why we need to do the opposite of what people like Klaus Schwab were proposing. That's important. And it's also important because it allows business leaders who are there to find out that Canada is a good place to invest. I don't know how this all started. I think it was about the Great Reset. and about COVID and people having too much time on their hands and looking for someone to blame for the situation we were in. But it has gone beyond legitimate criticism. I've been a critic of the group for more than a decade, Hal, a strong critic, but don't believe the hype that's out there now.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.